Well, g'day guys, and welcome back to a new video from Leila Central. We're going to be continuing our painting on our cement plant here. So we're going to be essentially working on the window frames themselves. I'm going to give it a bit of a dust using some pigments as well. And to those that have been waiting for this video, I do apologise. This had taken so long to get this video done. I do appreciate your patience. Alright, so we'll get started. So as you can see, it's a bit of a clear form of actual window frame. Now here I'm using some burnt umber from AK Interactive, and it's a bit of a dark sort of color. Now put a couple of drops on here. Now the reason I've left this part in the video is to show you, the importance of testing your paints on surfaces before you just go full berserk. Now just got a flat brush here, and that's the effect that I actually got on the window frame itself. It was too transparent. So having said that, you always got to chuck in a good primer, as you can see here. Now, unfortunately, this is a big bottle. Now, this is just Vallejo's grey primer. Now, what I've done is I've just watered it down slightly. Now, I'll show you the effects. Some people will actually dry brush across like what you're seeing here, where I'm dragging the brush essentially perpendicular to the window frames themselves. Now, you can get a good finish on the frame itself. It can be a bit more difficult, but you can see I've made a bit of a mess. Now what I'm doing here, is doing some more shorter things, which can work out all right. But then what I'll do is I'll actually show you what my preferred method is when it comes to doing it. So you can see there I've got one window completely covered in the stuff. Now what I do here is I'll run that brush going in the direction that window frame actually is, and you'll end up with a bit more of a neater finish here. So just running it across, my brush isn't loaded too much. Obviously you want to put a bit of paint on your brush, but you don't want to put too much where you lose control of it. Same with your paint thinning as well. When you thin your paints, it's a very fine line. You need to thin it, but you need to be able to still maintain control over the paint that you put in. So as you can see here, I just go along basically working in the same direction as the window frame itself. You still make mistakes. I am not a perfect painter. I do enjoy my painting, but yeah, doing that, and you'll get a good finish on the actual window frames itself, and that's the undercoat. So yeah, continuing a bit more with the actual painting here. Now in some cases like this, I'm actually doing a second coat, and the reason being that clear acrylic for these windows themselves, well, it took the undercoat pretty well. It essentially needs some two coats in some parts, and as you could see just before with my brush, I've essentially just shown you, I've got a bit of paint on the brush, not too much, just enough so I can actually work with it. Now as you can see here on my first test piece where I've got some that undercoat over the cross. Now what I'm using here is essentially a bit of thinner. Now excuse my hands here. And if you just get some regular thinners, do it on put it onto the area that you want to remove, give it a rub, and eventually it will wear away for you, leaving you clear windows. So as you can see there, taking it away, and the more harder you rub, the more you will take off. You got to be careful though, you will take your undercoat off around the window frame itself if you're not too careful. Now here I'm just using a little bit of a sponge. This came out of a packet, I think, of a miniature. Now this is a bit of a rough, coarse texture to the foam, something that I use. And the other thing you'll need now is a pair of tweezers just to hold part of that foam. Now I'll actually rip a small piece off, and as you can see here, I've put the two ends in the tweezers themselves, and when I press down, as you can see, I'm avoiding any sharp corners where possible, so it's completely rounded. Now going back to our first color that I tried to use, some burnt umber, I've just dipped essentially the sponge in the paint there, wiped a good portion of it off, and then what I'm doing is just pressing very gently onto the actual window frame surfaces. Now unfortunately when I recorded this, I didn't realize my hand was in the way like this, but I will actually zoom in a minute to show you the effects on the window frames, and there's no right or wrong way on how you apply this. It's up to you. The idea of this, me putting essentially this brown, is to show that the paint's been peeling away, the white paint for the window frames, and the brown is essentially the wood or timber showing through, as you can see here. So different effects. In some cases, if you press too hard, you'll get it on the actual window itself, as you can see in some of those. But it gives a bit of an imitation of some it's the window frame's been there a while. You know, the paint starts to come away, the timber's exposed. You know, and of course you apply as much as you want to your liking and preference. I wanted this to have a bit more well-worn, well-used sort of window frame itself. Yeah. Okay, now what we've got here is essentially some white paint that I've diluted quite a fair bit, as you can see there. What I've actually done is I have diluted it with water with a drop of dish soap. And the dish soap essentially helps with the capillary action, getting around to areas. Now all I'm doing here is applying it around the windows themselves. Now you might be asking, well, why are you doing this? Well, it is partially transparent. What I wanted the windows to have the feel and the look that there's been dust, the concrete dust from the cement plant, getting amongst the windows and the frames, and it's settling in, you know, creating that bit of a musk or a filter across the windows. Now when they're dry, as you can see here, they're still partially transparent, but there's some that are been covered completely over. Some of them have gone just around the edges and left the center clear, and the reason for that is because I'll come back with a second coat over it. Now what we've got here is essentially just some metallic paint, nothing special. There's plenty of metallic paints out there from AK Interactive, Vallejo, Games Workshop. Now I'm just applying a coat here across the actual door itself. Now this I believe is just a simple gunmetal. When you actually paint the roller door things, you want to make sure you get the trim as well. As you can see that I'm actually doing that. Nothing special, just painting the roller door. Now you've got to make sure it's dried properly. Here I'll actually show you what happens if the paint isn't dried properly. Now I actually thought at the time it was, but me didn't actually test it. Now it was dry in the main open flat areas, but in the corners it essentially was still partially wet. Now when I actually applied this wash, which is a brown wash, it actually started to pull it away. As you can see there, when I've done that stroke downwards, you can see where it's pulled some of that metallic paint away. So you know, take care, make sure your paint is dried properly. Don't do what I did and press on. So that was a brown wash that I've applied. Again, that was just diluted brown paint. Here I'm applying a black, same procedure as well, watered down very thinly in a drop of dish soap so it can spread properly. And that's to give essentially the roller door that oily, you know, worn, used sort of appearance. Nothing special. You know, you can apply a fair more bit to whatever taste you want. Yeah. All right. Now we're moving on to some pigments. Now here I've essentially got some dark earth, some light dust, some dark iron, and white ashes. Now I did end up using the dark iron, and if you compare these two, there you can see the light dust is essentially a bit more off-white, because the white is certainly strong. Now the other thing I'm using here is this sandwich keeper that we were going to get rid of. I thought this would be great to store the pigments in, where I can use them. If I've got any left over, I can just close her up and, you know, move it around without having them spilt anywhere. And the other thing we're going to be using is I've got this very soft paintbrush quite here, a bit more larger than normal, and the only reason I'm using this is because of the building. So beautiful fibers on there. Now I'm just starting with some light dust at the moment, so not white ashes but light dust, and I'm essentially just dabbing my brush into the powder. I'm then applying it to the building in a downwards direction. Now I'm applying it in areas that I would feel where dust may accumulate. I'm also putting it where I believe, you know, it's essentially comparing it to a photo, looking at the building and go, you know, is it dusty enough to my liking? Now, as you can see, I'm also doing some work around the windows themselves, because to me, there's horizontal surfaces there, including the actual roller door itself, where dust would build up along those edges there, you know, around the window frames. And to me, that's critical. I go to some facilities where, you know, there's dust, there's gunk, there's all sorts of stuff built up on those surfaces because no one cleans them. And this being a factory as well, you know, you would imagine it would get pretty dusty. You know, bags might bust open, you know, all sorts of things venting. And it's a subtle dusting that I'm actually doing here with this light dust. So that's my foundation first to begin with. Now what I'm doing here, as you can see, I've got a tiny amount of white ashes. Now white is a very strong colour. very stark in some cases. So what I'm doing here is I've just got a small amount on my brush, applying it in patches, not everywhere. And in some cases, as you can see with this, I'm not using much, and it's making that change again. So again, just putting it in places where I feel it's needed, particularly around the window frames, the doors themselves, and just doing what I feel I am happy with. So yeah, and make sure do your downward strokes. So yeah, and yeah, she's starting to look good. All right, now what we're looking at here is fixing it. Now I'm using just some regular MIG pigment fixer here. You can use an aerosol varnish. The reason I didn't here is because I've got pigments along those window frames there. If I used an aerosol, it would have blown it out on me. I wanted to keep that build up in those areas there. So what I'm doing is I'm just dipping a small brush in the fixer, and I'm just lightly touching the surface. And as you might be able to see in the video here, as soon as I touch that surface, it's the capillary action is going everywhere, and as you'll see here, so just a little touch on the surface and you can see it spreading. You can see the dust build up on the surfaces as well, and the combination of earlier with the windows where I used essentially that thin white paint to create a dusty window, that combined with the pigments gives the impression that the dust is caught on the windows haven't been cleaned in ages, and it's doing a good job. Now, one thing you may notice is you can see where some of the pigment fixer has actually started to run, or in some cases, like around the door here, it's actually gone upwards against gravity. But once it's dry, it doesn't look too bad, as you can see by these photos. So I hope you guys actually enjoyed this. It's like I mentioned, it's not a super long video. I do appreciate your patience, and hopefully you can produce something like this as well that you're happy with. Now, coming up on Leila Central, I soon tackle my painting attention to painting these concrete silos for the cement plant, and I start to look at track planning for the cement plant. So stay tuned, guys. So yeah, thanks for watching, guys. If you like the video, don't forget to give it a thumbs up. Feel free to share it if you want, and of course, if you're new to the channel and you've just watched this, hit that subscribe button, and that way you can see more of my future videos. Anyway, guys, thank you for watching. Take care, and we will see you again soon. Bye.